The time period around World War I saw very rapid technological advance and innovation, primarily in the field of warfare technologies, as would be expected. Among these new inventions were the machine gun, which initiated the large-scale shift from open-field combat to trench warfare; poison gases, which though were condemned by the Allies as an insidious violation of the rules of war, were used widely on both sides; the tank, which didn't have a huge effect in World War I, but took the first steps in dismantling trench warfare nonetheless; and the winged aircraft, which though in World War I primarily served only in reconnaissance, would in later wars play a much more significant role.
To start off, the machine gun. Invented in 1884 by Hiram Maxim, it was first utilized in World War I by the Germans, who recognized its usefulness from the beginning of the war, though Maxim actually first offered to sell his design to the British, who dismissed it as inconsequential. As a fact, it was anything but inconsequential, as it made necessary the large-scale shift to trench warfare, and very probably was the cause of the majority of combat-sustained casualties, second only to disease. It was extremely useful in mowing down vast quantities of soldiers, as it could fire between 300 and 600 rounds per minute, or 5 to 10 rounds per second. It had several disadvantages, however. For one, it was subject to frequent jams and overheats, the latter of which could only be combined with bulky water or air cooling systems. These added to the 40 to 60 kilogram weight, or up to and over 145 pounds. It also generally required a team of 4 to 6 people to operate. All of these factors combined made the machine gun a solely defensive weapon, as it would have been far too dangerous and difficult to lug around the battlefield by hand, thus how trench warfare was necessary. Troops who weren't dug in would get mowed down by the hundreds, so everyone needed to build trench systems. When they tried to attack each other's trenches, they'd get massacred by machine gun fire, therefore no movement happened and tens of thousands of people died every day, pretty much because of the machine gun.
Secondly, poison gas. Gas in World War I was, contrary to common conception, actually first used by the French, though it was only tear gas, which is non-lethal. In accordance with common conception, however, was that the Germans were the first to use gas in large quantities, and also pioneered gas technology and the use of lethal gas. At first, they just experimented around with tear gas and other non-lethal gases, developing technologies for gas delivery systems and such like. Later on, however, they delved into the use of deadly gases, the first of such being chlorine, a substance that, when inhaled, will do serious damage to the lungs and the respiratory system. Chlorine was first used at Ypres, and though it actually succeeded in breaking the enemy line, the Germans were too taken aback by its success to do anything, so the salient reformed and the Allies took the battle. In any case, research went on and the Germans came up with various other gases, such as phosgene, a chemical that does much the same thing as chlorine but doesn't cause the victim to cough so much, and so thus they inhale more gas and more people end up dying. And ypirite, more commonly known as mustard gas. Mustard gas was arguably the apex of World War I gas technology, as it was difficult to detect, except by smell, and stayed in the ground for up to weeks after the original gas attack. Some symptoms of exposure to it being irritated, burning eyes, sometimes blindness, itchy red skin, which formed later into yellow blisters, coughing, bloody nose, sore throat, nausea, and vomiting. The gas did not kill very quickly and actually usually killed indirectly, but it is still classifiable as a lethal gas. It is worthwhile to note that though the Germans led the research into this technology, most other nations followed their example, all the while condemning the Germans for its use. In any case, gas was a very useful weapon at the beginning of World War I, as it would sink into the enemy trenches and either kill the enemy or force them out into the open for exposure to machine gun fire, and because of its various effects worked as a terror weapon and attacked enemy morale. Toward the end of the war, however, the usefulness of poison gas dropped significantly due to the use of gas masks, which essentially nullified any use of gas. Thus, it was really only a World War I thing and wasn't even that useful in the later years of the war.
However, there were various technologies that did make it past World War I, one such being the tank. The first tanks to be deployed were developed by Great Britain, whose Royal Navy oversaw the development process due to the tanks originally being viewed as land boats. There had been armored vehicles in existence before the tank, and some had actually been deployed at the beginning of the war when people were expecting the war to be mobile, but they ended up being unable to cope with the trenches and the rough terrain accompanying trench warfare. The tank was developed to fix this problem, as well as provide an anti-machine gun and anti-trench weapon. Its armor, which really at the time wasn't that heavy, could for the most part deflect machine gun and other small arms bullets. And because of its use of treads for locomotion, it could roll over trenches and plow through barbed wire pretty easily. Most tank models had machine guns attached to them at various points, and eventually toward the latter part of the war some came equipped with cannons. The tank was still, however, an experimental weapon, and it was extremely prone to failure. Its treads would often fall off, it would break down frequently, and it was not all uncommon to get stuck in a ditch. To add to that, throughout the war, tanks achieved a maximum speed of only 3 or 4 miles per hour. Overall, the tank in World War I really wasn't all that significant, and though it did succeed a bit in weakening the stalemate of trench warfare, its primary role was to set the stage for later wars in which tanks would be used much more efficiently.
Another technology that wasn't fully utilized in World War I was the airplane. This was probably largely in part because the war took place just a little over 10 years after the Wright brothers' first successful flight, so the plane technology wasn't that advanced. Indeed, most early planes were made out of wood and canvas, and they had pusher engines, which had the propeller facing backwards and pushed the aircraft through the air, as compared to more efficient tractor engines in which the propeller faced forward and pulled the plane through its flight. Additionally, most early pilots received little or no training, and even later in the war training was sub-sufficient. The most common and important uses of aircraft in World War I were observation and reconnaissance, in which planes scouted enemy positions and made photo maps of the enemy territory. They also helped artillery in spotting targets, as by this time artillery had advanced to the degree where they'd be firing at things they couldn't even see. The aerial observers would use a clock system to guide artillery fire, in which they used a letter to represent the distance from the target the previous shell had hit, and a number on the clock to represent in which direction the shell had been off in. All observation scout planes were at very great risk throughout the war, however, because not only were they the main target of all fighter planes and AA guns because of their great use, they generally had to maintain a level, straight line, constant velocity course in order to make accurate observations about the ground war and create decent photo maps. On that topic, observation planes were the reason for the invention of fighters. They turned out to be extremely useful, so people invented things to destroy those of the enemy. Fighters originally started out simply as pilots flying around shooting at each other with pistols, but since that was completely ineffective, people soon started attaching machine guns to planes. Early fighter models were relatively ineffective, as the heavy machine gun made the plane lose balance easily, and they required 2 people to operate, one to fly, one to shoot. Additionally, some models the gunmen had to actually stand up to shoot the machine gun, which was not a very good idea if they wanted to stay in the plane. Eventually, someone invented the interrupter gear, which lets pilots mount a machine gun on the nose of their plane and be able to fly without destroying their own propeller and downing their plane. This model craft took only 1 person to operate, and was the first true fighter of the war. Fighters would patrol the sky in small groups, searching for enemy observation planes and protecting their own, and occasionally meeting with an enemy fighter patrol and getting into dogfights. Craft during these fights had to be flown by relatively skilled pilots, as not only did their maneuvering in 3 dimensions at high speeds require significant skill, fighters of the time could only carry about 50 seconds of machine gun fire. One of the most famous World War I fighter pilots was Manfred von Richthofen, otherwise known as the Red Baron. The Red Baron downed in excess of 80 enemy aircraft throughout his career, which ended on April 21, 1918 due to a bullet of unknown origin. In any case, while observation planes and fighters were the main participants in the air war in World War I, some early bombers did emerge. For the most part, these were just people chucking grenades out of their aircraft into the enemy's trenches, but some prototypical specialized bombing planes were occasionally seen. For the most part, full utilization of the airplane's potential had to wait until later wars, but World War I was the first major stepping stone in aerial warfare.
In sum, World War I bore many new technological advances and innovations, which would not only change the face of war at the time, but also pave the way for many wars to come. Including machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and airplanes, some of these new inventions would not live past 1919, while others continue to play a crucial role in the battle